The Grand Empire Theater in Midtown Manhattan was buzzing with energy. Velvet ropes lined the marble floor chandeliers, sparkled above a sea of sequins and tailored tuxedos, and the air smelled faintly of champagne and expensive perfume. It was the annual Broadway fundraising gala, where producers, investors, and artists mingled under a ceiling painted with gods and angels. It was also the last place Avery Monroe wanted to be seen. She stood near the back entrance in a floor-length emerald dress hair, swept to one side and fingers nervously gripping the strap of her clutch. The plan was simple. Drop off the design portfolios for her firm stay, for 10 minutes avoid the press and disappear before Carter Vaughn spotted her. That plan failed the moment she saw him. Carter. Same slicked back hair, same designer loafers, same smirk that once fooled her into thinking he loved her. He was standing near the main bar, charming a theater heiress with a whiskey glass in hand. His eyes scanned the room like a predator tracking familiar prey. She panicked. He had not seen her yet, not yet. She turned sharply, heels clicking against marble, and slipped into the first open hallway she saw. Behind her she heard her name. Not loudly, but enough to freeze her spine. Avery. That voice, smooth, casual, like he had every right to be speaking it again. She didn't answer. She ran, not gracefully, not elegantly. She moved like someone running from a fire, weaving through waiters, ducking past art collectors, and tripping over her own dress hem. She needed a place to hide, fast. She spotted a long banquet table in the corner of the hall, crisp white tablecloth, draped to the floor. 2 men stood nearby, their backs turned deep in conversation. One of them was tall, broad-shouldered, in a fitted black suit that didn't wrinkle even when he shifted his stance. She didn't think. She dove under the table. It was cramped, smelled like lavender polish and linen. She curled into herself, pulled the tablecloth down a bit, and tried to hold her breath. Then it happened. Her hand, in an attempt to balance herself on the floor, reached out. Something warm, solid, slightly tense under her fingers. Then it moved. A deep voice dropped like thunder from above. "What exactly are you searching for down there?" Avery froze. Her eyes widened in horror. Slowly, painfully, she tilted her chin upward and found herself staring at the inside of a tailored suit jacket. Above her, seated, was a man who had just become part of the most humiliating moment of her life. His legs were spread slightly, one arm resting over the table edge, and a pair of piercing gray eyes stared straight down at her through the cloth's opening. No shock, no laughter, just cold, unamused awareness. She tried to speak. I needed to check the structure. For safety. The man didn't blink. His companion turned. "Silas, what's—" "It's fine," the man interrupted. "Just someone performing an unscheduled inspection." Avery scrambled back, hitting her head on the table on the way out. Her hair was a mess, her face burning. She stood, tried to smile, failed. "Sorry, wrong table. I'll be leaving now." She didn't wait for a response. She walked away, fast heels, uneven dignity, trailing somewhere behind her. But as she disappeared into the crowd, Silas Callahan's gaze lingered, calm, calculating, and ever so slightly intrigued. Avery Monroe had always believed that bad luck wore expensive shoes. That belief had only grown stronger after last night's fiasco beneath the banquet table of the Grand Empire Theater. She had made it home past midnight, collapsed on her couch, still in the emerald dress, and stared blankly at the ceiling for a full hour, replaying every humiliating second. Her hand had not just ended up somewhere off limits. It had landed right in the lap of Silas Callahan, the notoriously private billionaire who practically owned Broadway. She had read about him for years, heard the whispers in green rooms and production offices, seen the way people stood straighter when he entered a rehearsal hall. Silas was power without volume. He didn't yell, he didn't pose. He simply walked in and made the air colder. And now, thanks to a moment of panic, Avery had accidentally groped him in front of half the industry. It was poetic in the cruelest way. She was scheduled to present her set design concepts that morning to a panel of producers for an upcoming reimagined Broadway revival of Tempest Rising. The show was backed by Callahan Productions. She had been selected after a national design contest, a career-changing opportunity. Now she wasn't even sure she could show her face in the same building. But Avery was nothing if not stubborn. She got up, showered, brushed out the chaos in her curls, and dressed in her sharpest black blazer, trying to manifest the kind of confidence she wished she actually had. By 9:30 a.m., she stood in the glass elevator of Callahan Tower, 29 stories up, holding her design portfolio like a shield. Inside the executive conference room, voices murmured politely. Chairs scraped across polished wood floors, and coffee steamed in delicate porcelain cups. She walked in exactly on time. 5 men and 2 women sat around the oval table, most glancing up with polite interest, but her attention zeroed in instantly on the man at the far end of the room. He sat straight elbows, resting lightly on the armrests, dressed in a charcoal suit and crisp white shirt, no tie. His expression unreadable, but his eyes, gray, piercing, unmistakable. Silas Callahan. Her heart stopped. He was the one person in the room not holding a notebook. His gaze met hers without hesitation, and a flicker of recognition danced at the corners of his eyes. It was the only sign that he remembered anything about last night. And yet he said nothing. The woman to his right gestured to an empty seat. "Mrs. Monroe, we're ready when you are." Avery forced herself to move. She walked the length of the room heels, clicking evenly, and sat down across from the man she had accidentally assaulted with her fingertips. She opened her folder. "Let's begin." Her voice didn't shake. That was a small miracle. She launched into her concept pitch with practiced rhythm, showing renderings of storm-inspired scaffolding and mood-responsive lighting. She explained how the swirling illusions would mirror the internal chaos of the protagonist, how the use of cold metal and warm wood could tell a silent story of conflict and transformation. She made eye contact with each committee member, except one. Silas hadn't spoken, not a word. He sat with his fingers steepled, watching her the way a chess master watches a new opponent. She continued despite the cold sweat under her collar. "I've incorporated projection mapping to create an immersive storm without relying on mechanical rain. That way the emotion remains center stage." When she finished, the room was quiet for a second longer than normal. Then soft nods, quiet approval. One man clapped. "Impressive clarity, Ms. Monroe." Another asked a technical question. Then finally Silas spoke. His voice was low, smooth, professional. "What's your contingency plan if the lighting fails mid-performance?" Avery blinked, then smiled. "Hope the actors can act their way through darkness. Laughter, small but real." Silas's expression didn't change. He simply nodded once. Understood. That was it. The meeting wrapped. Avery packed her things. As she reached the door, a voice stopped her. "Miss Monroe." It was Silas. Everyone turned. He remained seated. Just a reminder, our tech run is this Friday. You'll be expected, of course. She nodded, then walked out, legs wobbling beneath her like overcooked spaghetti. She took the elevator down alone, heart pounding. He remembered her. He hadn't called her out, but he had definitely remembered. And worse, he hadn't smiled, not even a twitch. Friday arrived with the heaviness of dread and the chaos of last-minute tech checks. The Empire Theater's stage crew was already setting up the rigging. By the time Avery walked through the backstage entrance, lugging her sketches laptop and an emergency kit of duct tape, Velcro, and spare bulbs. She wore dark jeans, a navy utility jacket, and an expression of absolute focus. But inside she was spiraling. Today wasn't just any tech run. It was the first full walkthrough of her designs under performance lighting, and the first time she'd see Silas Callahan again since the presentation. Technically, he hadn't said anything unkind, but that was part of the problem. He had said almost nothing at all, and his silence, controlled, deliberate, was far more intimidating than any outburst. Avery stepped into the orchestra pit and surveyed the stage. Her centerpiece, a rotating storm gate made of tempered glass and metallic frames, glimmered under the test lights. The atmosphere was dark, moody, magnetic, exactly how she'd pictured it. She had just begun checking the projection panels when a shadow moved beside her. She turned. Silas Callahan stood there, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the stage. "You're early," she said before she could stop herself. "So are you," he replied. His voice had that same smooth detachment, but it lacked any real edge today. Just observation. "I like to make sure things don't fall apart before they begin," she said, returning to her notes. "Then you've chosen the right profession. Theater is built on breakdowns, and somehow still people applaud." She looked at him. Was that a joke, maybe? He didn't smile, but the pause in his delivery suggested he was aware of the irony. There was a moment of silence between them, not uncomfortable but curious. Then Avery muttered, "Okay, let's do this," and turned toward the crew. Over the next 3 hours, they ran through all major transitions. Lighting, sound, set, movement. Silas didn't hover, but remained visible, always standing with arms behind his back, like a commander watching soldiers train. Avery gave orders without hesitation, climbed ladders, rewired, a flickering light adjusted the projection map when the digital storm misaligned by a second. Every time she looked up, she caught him watching. At first it unnerved her. Later it only distracted her. She hated how aware she was of his presence. It wasn't attraction exactly, more like gravitational pull. After the tech run, the team began packing up, leaving Avery alone on stage to do one final check of the storm gate rotation. She knelt beside the base, adjusting the motor controls. Behind her footsteps echoed across the wooden floor. She didn't look up. "Let me guess, you're here to critique my wiring." Silas's voice was closer than she expected. "Actually, I was wondering what you were doing under a table that night." Avery froze fingers, pausing on the screws she was tightening. Slowly, she turned to face him. "You remember, I do." His tone was neutral, but the fact that he brought it up at all meant something had shifted. "I was hiding," she said honestly, "from a mistake I made 3 years ago." His name is Carter Vaughn. Silas didn't ask questions. He didn't react. He simply nodded once, encouraging her to continue. "We used to date. He lied, borrowed money, disappeared. He resurfaced the night of the gala. I panicked. There was nowhere to go, and I thought, maybe if I hide the past, won't see me." Silas considered that, then asked, "And did it work? for about 7 seconds. Then my hand ended up on your thigh. That finally made him blink. Not a smile, but a breath through the nose, a slight softening of the jaw. Almost, if it's any consolation, he said I've seen worse entrances. She laughed. The sound surprised them both. You don't talk much, do you? She asked. No, most people talk enough for both of us. Then why are you still here? You've been watching all day. Theater's not your usual haunt. I fund shows. I prefer to know where my money is going. She tilted her head. And is it going somewhere good? I haven't decided. Yet. His answer lingered, not in the air, but in her spine. A deliberate statement that suggested not just the project was under evaluation. She gathered her things and stood up. Just so you know, I don't usually grope men under tables. Only the emotionally unavailable ones, she smirked. Only the ones sitting still long enough. They walked toward the wings. As they reached the stage exit, Silas paused. I have a question. Ask. Did you design that storm gate before or after the gala before? Why? Because it feels like something someone builds when they want to stand in the middle of chaos and survive it. Avery looked at him startled. You really don't talk like a CEO. That's because I'm not a CEO on stage. Then who are you here? The part of me that remembers what it's like to believe in stories. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Something in her chest tightened. He was unexpected, layered, not the cold billionaire stereotype she had assumed. The next few weeks passed in a strange new rhythm. Silas showed up at every rehearsal. He never intervened, but he was always present. He asked questions about stage weight, offered notes about timing, even carried coffee once when Avery's hands were full. She in turn began noticing things. He watched her differently than the others. Not with desire, but with interest, with thought. When she joked with the crew, his eyes followed her. When she struggled with set angles, he stood beside her but said nothing, just close enough to be a presence. One night after a long rehearsal, Avery sat alone in the front row, sketching set adjustments when Silas approached. You missed a spot, he said, pointing to a corner of the backdrop. I know, ran out of time, or energy. He handed her a bottle of water. She took it, surprised. Thanks. He didn't walk away. Instead, he sat beside her. Stage lights off, theater empty, quiet. You've rebuilt this entire space, he said. Not just physically, emotionally. It doesn't feel like a production. It feels like a confession. Avery stared at the stage. Maybe I needed to say something I couldn't say with words. Then you said it well. She turned toward him. For someone who avoids talking, you speak better than most people I know. I listen better than I speak. That's rare. That's intentional. They sat in silence. Eventually, Avery stood. I should go before I start rewriting the ending. Let me drive you. You don't have to. I want to. Outside the city was quiet, the kind of quiet that happens just before midnight, when even the taxis stop honking. Silas opened the car door for her. She hesitated. He raised an eyebrow. It's not a trap door. She got in. The ride to her apartment was filled with half smiles, unfinished questions, and the weight of something growing but unspoken. When the car stopped, she turned to him. Thank you for the ride, for not mentioning the table thing in front of everyone. He nodded. Avery, he said before she stepped out. Yes. I think I'd rather have you crash into my life like that than not at all. She blinked, then laughed softly. You're strange. I'm rich. It's forgiven. She shook her head and closed the door. As the car pulled away, Silas glanced into the rearview mirror. and saw her still standing there watching him go. And for the first time in years, he wondered what it would feel like if someone stayed. The city moved on as it always did, in its usual rhythm of footsteps, sirens, and ambition. But for Avery, the days following that late-night ride with Silas felt like suspended time. Something between them had shifted, not by force or declaration, but in the quiet way that gravity rearranges itself when two bodies get too close. He no longer watched her like a financier inspecting an investment. Now he watched her like someone trying to read a language he had long forgotten how to speak. Avery tried to ignore it, tried to focus solely on the work, on the rotating storm gate, the light transitions, the softness of velvet backdrops. But even the smallest of Silas's gestures began to echo. The way he stood a little closer each time they spoke, the way he remembered her coffee order, the way his silence felt less like a wall and more like a question waiting to be answered. The other crew members had begun to notice too, though no one said anything directly. Instead, they exchanged glances, whispered theories, and quietly made space for whatever was building between the designer and the billionaire. And just as Avery started to let herself feel safe again, safe in her career, in her instincts, in the possibility that someone like Silas could actually see her, the past returned with perfect timing and familiar cruelty. Carter Vaughn appeared on a Wednesday. She had just stepped out of a lighting calibration meeting when she spotted him waiting near the service entrance of the theater. Leather jacket, smug grin hands, tucked in his pockets like he belonged everywhere. Her breath caught. She hadn't seen him in over 2 years. "Carter," she said flatly. He stepped forward. "Avery." "God, you look incredible." "Don't," she snapped. He raised both hands. "Look, I didn't come here to start anything. I just saw your name in the program and thought maybe you'd want to talk. About what, how you took my savings and disappeared? How you signed your name onto my credit without permission." He shifted his weight. "I made mistakes. I'm not proud of it. But I'm trying to fix things." Avery looked around. There were stagehands nearby. She didn't want to make a scene, not here, not now. So she nodded once. 5 minutes, that's all. They walked to the side alley where cast and crew sometimes took smoke breaks. Carter leaned against the brick wall like he was posing for a photo shoot. "I know I messed up, but I've been clean, I've got a job, and when I saw your name, I thought maybe you'd want closure." Closure doesn't come from the person who broke you. It comes from knowing they can't do it again. He gave a weak smile. "You always had the best lines." She stepped back. "We're done. Always were, always will be." And for the record, showing up here is not romantic. It's harassment. He didn't follow her, but someone else had watched the entire exchange. Across the street, behind a tinted car window, a woman lowered her sunglasses. Vivian Callahan. Silas's mother had not been formally introduced to Avery Monroe, but she had done her research. Background checks, financial records, family ties, and most importantly, past relationships. To Vivian, romance had no place in business, especially when the business in question was the Callahan name. Avery, despite her talent, was still a girl from nowhere, carrying the scent of risk. Vivian didn't need to destroy her. She just needed to let the girl ruin herself. That same evening, Avery returned to her apartment to find a bouquet of sunflowers on her doorstep. No note, just a white card with a time. Friday, 8 p.m. She didn't have to guess. It was Silas. The invitation wasn't a command. It was a question. When Friday came, she wore a navy dress, kept her curls loose, and told herself it wasn't a date. Just dinner. Just two people who shared a stage, a story, and something neither of them had named yet. The restaurant was quiet, tucked between galleries in Soho, lit by low lamps and old jazz. Silas was already seated when she arrived. He stood as she approached, pulling out her chair with a silent ease that made her feel seen without being observed. They didn't talk business, not once. They talked about books, about weather, about the strangest thing they'd each ever seen on stage. When dessert came, Silas said, "I don't usually do this. Invite people in? Then why me?" He studied her. "Because you didn't ask to be let in. You just came in anyway." Her chest tightened. "Silas, I don't know what this is, but I do know I can't afford to be anyone's mistake. You're not," he said, "not even close." When they left the restaurant, it was raining lightly. Silas didn't offer his coat. He simply walked beside her, quiet, present, warm. And that was the night the first photo was taken. From across the street, a long lens camera captured Avery stepping slightly towards Silas, laughing at something he said. It looked intimate, familiar, like love in its earliest form. The next morning, a theater gossip blog posted the photo with a headline, "Billionaire producer and Broadway's rising designer." The comments exploded. Some were supportive. Others questioned her intentions. The article hinted at impropriety, conflict of interest, favoritism. Silas saw it first. He called Avery. "It's already out. I know. I'm sorry." "For what?" "For existing in the same room as you. You've done nothing wrong." His voice was calm but tight. Still by noon, producers were murmuring. Sponsors had questions. Vivian, of course, had opinions. She visited Silas's office unannounced. "We both know what this looks like," she said. "I don't care what it looks like," he replied. "You should. We're not in the business of emotional attachments. We build legacies. And she's not built for this world." Silas stood from behind his desk. Maybe it's time this world makes space for people like her. Vivian left without another word, but she didn't give up. That night, Avery received a message. "Unknown number. We should talk. Your friend Carter has been very chatty lately." Attached was a photo. Carter and a woman, Vivian Callahan, seated in a lounge, talking like old acquaintances. Avery felt the blood drain from her face. She called Carter. He didn't answer. She called again. Still nothing. The next day she arrived at the theater and felt it instantly, the shift, the glances, the whispering. She walked into the production office and found a printed blog article on the desk, a new headline. "Designer's ex reveals shocking truth. She's not who you think she is." The article contained partial quotes, twisted facts, and implications that she had manipulated her way into the project. No evidence, just suggestion. It was enough. Silas didn't text that day, or the day after. Avery kept working, kept showing up, but inside something began to close. She had come here to build something beautiful, and now it felt like she was being dismantled piece by piece. She stood center stage late one night alone, staring at the lights she had chosen. This was supposed to be her escape, her reclamation, and now she was drowning in it. She didn't cry, not yet, but the tears were coming. By the end of that week, Avery felt like she was living inside a storm of her own design. The city continued its rhythms, but inside the Empire Theater, everything had shifted. The once warm nods from crew members were now hesitant. The casual small talk between scenes had gone quiet. No one said anything directly, but she felt the space around her tighten the invisible tension. that comes when your name begins to float through the wrong conversations. The worst part wasn't even the gossip, it was Silas's silence. Since the second article, he hadn't called, hadn't texted, hadn't appeared at rehearsal. She kept expecting him to storm in, to dismiss the rumors, to stand beside her, the way she had begun, to stand beside him. But instead, the absence became louder than any accusation. On Monday morning, she walked into the lighting booth and found her access badge deactivated. When she asked the assistant director, stammered an excuse about tightening security. She didn't argue, she just stepped back, pulled out her notebook, and rewrote her cues manually. That afternoon, she received an internal memo stating that all staff communications about personal relationships were being reviewed under the theater's conflict of interest policy. Her name wasn't on it, but she didn't need it to be. The implication was clear. She had gone from rising star to walking liability. At 7 p.m. after the final rehearsal, Avery stayed behind. She sat in the third row of the empty house and stared at the set she had poured herself into. The storm gate turned slowly under the test sequence, casting fractured shadows against the velvet backdrop. It was still beautiful, still hers, and yet it now felt like a stage built for someone else's story. The door creaked behind her. She turned, heart kicking up, and saw him, Silas. In his dark coat collar, turned against the wind eyes shadowed but sharp. They looked at each other for several long seconds before either of them spoke. "You disappeared," she said quietly. "You stopped calling." He walked down the aisle, slowly, not with the confidence of the man who funded productions, but like someone approaching something breakable. "I needed time to think. Did you think your silence would fix things? Or did you just need distance to decide if I was worth defending?" "That's not fair, Avery. No, what's not fair is being punished for something I didn't do. What's not fair is standing on a stage I helped build and being treated like an intruder." His jaw tightened. "I didn't believe the stories." "But you didn't say anything either," she snapped. "That's the part that hurts Silas. You knew me, and still you said nothing." "I wasn't sure what to believe," he admitted, voice low. And that hesitation told me everything. She stood gathering her things and began to walk away. He reached for her arm, but she pulled back. "I didn't come here to be rescued. I came here to create, to build something, to prove to myself that I could survive the wreckage Carter left behind. But I can't do that in a place where I'm constantly questioned." She walked past him, heels echoing against the floor, and didn't look back. The next morning, she submitted her formal withdrawal from the production. The document was short, professional, and irreversible. By noon, she had cleared her workspace and returned her credentials. She didn't cry in the building. She didn't say goodbye. She simply left. Across the city, in a sleek conference room on the top floor of Callahan Tower, Silas sat in silence, her resignation form on the table in front of him. Around him, producers debated sponsorships, budget concerns, and press management. Vivian Callahan sat at the far end of the room, unmoved, composed. She sipped her tea like nothing was burning. Silas barely heard any of it. When the meeting ended, he remained seated. Only when the room had emptied did he finally walk to the window and then stare out at the skyline. In his pocket was a note Avery had accidentally left behind, scribbled on the back of a lighting cue card. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It simply read, "I don't need to be believed with proof. I needed to be trusted with heart." He read it again and again until the words blurred. That night, Avery returned to her apartment and sat on the floor beside the Stormgate model she had originally built for the pitch. It was dusty, half-painted, chipped from being moved too many times. She stared at it for a long time before reaching for her sketch pad. She drew the same Stormgate, but this time added something else. A small door at its center, a way out, a symbol of escape, of release. She wasn't angry anymore, just tired. Not of the fight, but of having to prove herself over and over to people who never asked to understand her. She thought about Carter, about Vivian, about Silas, about the version of herself that had believed even for a moment that she could be seen and accepted fully. And for the first time in weeks, she let herself cry. Not from weakness, but from the grief of being misjudged by the one person she had almost trusted. Meanwhile, Silas returned home and opened a locked drawer in his study. Inside was a file folder, surveillance reports, blog sources, metadata from the published rumors. Something had felt wrong from the start. The timing, the angle of the photos, the phrasing in the anonymous tips. And now in silence, he began to pull apart the puzzle. Slowly, methodically, like someone building a case in court. Every source traced back to one address. His mother's personal assistant. Every article linked to a freelance writer previously employed by a firm funded by the Blackwood Group, the same group his mother had dinner with 2 weeks ago. At the bottom of the folder was a signed receipt for a digital manipulation service, purchased under an executive Callahan account. He stared at it for a long time, the truth hardening in his chest like cement. Vivian hadn't just disapproved of Avery, she had orchestrated her fall, and Silas had let it happen, not by action, but by absence. He looked at the resignation form again, at the space where Avery had signed her name. And in that moment, something inside him broke open, not from guilt, from clarity. The next morning he made 3 calls, one to the theater board, one to the press, and one to her. The call came while Avery was in the middle of rearranging the furniture in her small Brooklyn apartment. Not because it needed to be moved, but because something inside her refused to stay still. She had placed the phone on speaker, half expecting a telemarketer, or maybe even Carter again. But when the voice came through, she stopped cold. "Avery, it's me, Silas." She didn't answer at first, just stared at the desk where his Stormgate blueprint still sat folded in the corner. "I know I don't deserve your time right now," he continued, "but I'm asking for it anyway. 1 hour, 1 conversation, that's all." She remained silent. "You were right," he said. "I didn't defend you. I doubted you when it mattered. But I want to make it right." She hung up without replying, her hand shaking slightly. An hour later, she turned on the news and saw him standing behind a podium inside the Empire Theater's main stage. A live stream banner ran across the bottom of the screen. She reached for the remote, but didn't change the channel. Silas looked different, not in appearance, but in presence. He wasn't wearing a suit, only a simple white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. His voice was steady, deliberate. There have been a lot of questions lately about who deserves to be on this stage, about power, about position, about influence. And I've stayed silent too long, partly because I was afraid, and partly because I didn't yet understand what silence costs. He paused. "I'm not here to manage perception. I'm here to admit a failure. Not in production, not in business, but in character. Avery Monroe is not just a brilliant designer. She's a person of integrity, creativity, and courage. She was targeted, slandered, and doubted in a space she helped build. And I let it happen. I won't anymore. That's why, as of today, I'm stepping down from my executive position at Callahan Productions. The room erupted into murmurs, but he wasn't finished. If our industry can't survive without crushing the very voices it claims to support, then maybe the system needs rebuilding. My legacy isn't worth more than the truth. The stream ended. Avery sat frozen. Outside her window, the city continued, as if nothing had happened, but inside her chest, something shifted. A few hours later, she found an envelope taped to her door. No name, just a pale blue ribbon, the same color as the one she had once tied around a sketch Silas had complimented. Inside was a blueprint hand-drawn in ink, labeled simply, "The House I Should Have Built Sooner." She didn't cry, not yet. She just sat there staring at it, until the sun dipped behind the buildings and the shadows grew long across her floor. The next evening was the official opening of Tempest Rising. Avery didn't plan to go. Her name had already been removed from the program, replaced with a line crediting interim design support. But as the lights of Broadway glowed against the night sky, she found herself walking toward the theater anyway, not dressed up, not hiding either. She stood outside just behind the crowd of arriving guests and watched the marquee flicker above the doors. That's when she heard someone call her name, Avery. She turned. Silas stood a few feet away, alone holding the program from that evening. "I know I don't have the right to ask you to come inside," he said, "but there's something I'd like you to see." He handed her the program. She opened it. Her name was back, not only in the design credits but also in the director's note written by Silas himself. This show was made possible by someone who refused to shrink, even when the spotlight turned cold. She looked up at him, eyes wide. "You didn't have to do this." "No," he replied, "but I needed to, not for the audience, for you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a ring box. Her breath caught. "Silas, wait." "Not yet," he said quickly. "Not a proposal, a question." He opened the box. Inside was a tiny silver pendant shaped like the storm gate she had designed. On the back, engraved in clean script, for the one who stood in the center. "Will you stay, Avery, not for the show, not for the company, for me?" The crowd behind them swelled as the theater doors opened, but the noise faded to a hum. She stared at him, heart pounding, then stepped forward and took the pendant. "I will, but only if you promise never to go quiet when I need your voice." "I won't," he said. "I've learned the silence costs more than pride. It costs people." That night they didn't sit in the audience. They watched the play from backstage, side by side, hidden from view, but connected by the soft glow of the stage lights and the quiet realization that something broken had been rebuilt. After the final curtain call, when the applause faded and the actors filed off stage, Silas turned to her. "You once said you didn't want to be someone's mistake." She nodded. "You never were," he said. "You were my turning point." And with that, he reached for her hand, not with urgency, but with care, like someone finally willing to hold something fragile without fear of breaking it. A month had passed since the curtain fell on Tempest Rising, but the impact lingered far beyond the footlights. Avery Monroe had quietly opened her own design studio on the Lower East Side, a sunlit space tucked between a florist and a second-hand bookstore where the walls were lined with blueprints, fabric samples, and sketches that no longer needed approval from committees or signatures from men in suits. She named it the backdrop, not for irony but for honesty, because for years she had worked behind the scenes building worlds while hiding her own. Now the story was hers. One afternoon, as she adjusted the hanging lights in the front window, the bell above the door rang. She turned and saw him. Silas dressed not in a suit, but in a simple gray shirt, sleeves rolled, carrying a rolled-up drawing in one hand. He didn't say hello. He didn't offer excuses. He just walked to the central table, unrolled the page, and stepped back. Avery moved slowly toward him, eyes scanning the lines. It was a house, not a mansion, not an estate. A small, intentional home with wide windows, a shared studio space, and a note scribbled in the corner, built for the kind of life you don't run from. She looked up, tears rising. "You drew this?" He nodded. "I had to start building something real. And I didn't want to do it alone." Her voice was quiet. "Are you sure you're not just trying to make up for what happened?" Silas met her gaze. "I gave up my company, my name in the press, my plans. Not for redemption, for clarity. I needed to lose everything I built to see what actually mattered." He pulled a small velvet box from his coat pocket, but this time he didn't drop to one knee. He simply opened it between them. Inside was a ring, not large, not flashy. A simple band engraved on the inside with the words, "Room for honesty always." Avery reached out, closed the box gently, and placed her hand over his. "Then let's build the rest together." Later that year, their wedding wasn't held in a cathedral or a ballroom. It took place in a converted warehouse space, surrounded by strings of lights, unfinished sketches pinned to the walls, and the people who had stood by them when everything else fell away. During the ceremony, neither of them promised perfection. Instead, they promised presence. They promised to speak when it hurt and to listen when it was hard. When Silas said, "I vow to never go silent again," Avery smiled through her tears. After the vows, they stood hand in hand beside a new design, a model of the storm gate that had once symbolized chaos. But this one didn't rotate. It stood open, a frame, a passage, a reminder. As the guests clapped and the music rose, Avery whispered, "For the record, I still don't inspect tables." Silas leaned close. "No need. You already upended everything the moment you touched mine." And they laughed, surrounded not by drama or headlines, but by light, by warmth, and by the knowledge that love built without spectacle is the kind that lasts. In the end, it wasn't the storm that defined them. It was the choice to stay standing in its center together.